Hi guys, welcome back. Let's talk about a beautiful concept of ICT, such as the power of three. I'm sure that if I show you this symbol, some of you are going to recognize it, and maybe others are not and find it a little bit weird and funky. Well, this is how candles used to look like, and still today you can select to view your chart with this candle representation if you really want. Okay, but what does it mean? Well, this chart and this way of observing and representing a candle take into account time. And we're going to observe this symbol from left to right. We're going to be observing this symbol from left, so from your left to your right. And when we do observe it from our left to our right, we're going to notice that points go in sequence. And so things happen with a certain sequence, such as, for example, we have here point number one. So this is the first thing that's happening in that candle. Then we have our point number two. Then we have a rally up, our point number three. Then we have our point number four on top. And finally, the candle closes in our point number five. And so, how can we make sense of all of that? Well, the point number one is our opening price, and so it's the open. Then we have point number two, in which the price goes lower. We have point number three, in which the price rallies higher. We have a point number four in which the price forms a high. And finally, we have our point number five in which the price closes, finishes, and that point number five is lower than the point number four. And so, what do we have here? Well, we have the opening price, point number one. Then the price manipulates us thinking that it's going to go lower, point number two. But instead, the price does exactly the opposite and it rallies higher. And then it forms a high, only to finally be closing below the high for that, for example, week. And so the power of three can be based on several different time frames, can be based on the weekly, on the daily, but this is always somehow how the price keeps behaving. And so, keeping this in mind and keeping these points in mind, if we want to make a good profit, which move of the price we want to be participating in? So, where do we want to enter? Where do we want to be? And where do we want to exit that price movement? If we look at where do we want to enter our position, for example, where would you like to enter this move? It would be really good for us to enter in point number two when the price actually goes lower than the opening price. Yes, because by the price going lower than the opening price, it's actually an area on which we get a sort of a discount, right? And so when we are in discount, what we want to do is then be able to capture the price rally higher and so the rally of point number three. And we can do that only when we enter in point number two. And we want to be exiting in point number four, around point number four, where the price is at point number four, and so on and so forth. Okay, but if we want to enter here in point number two, what should we be then looking for in this specific area then? Well, we're going to be looking for opportunities to entry, such as, for example, fair value gaps, sell stops on a lower time frame, price trading down on an old high, for example, or an old low, and in general, something that will promote some level of discount for the price. And so, when we talk about power of three, guys, keep in mind the bullish power of three represents every single bullish candle, but it also represents the daily movements and the weekly movements. So, that said, we also can notice that in the markets, the true is also opposite because sometimes we have a bullish power of three and the candles, the daily movements, the weekly movements are behaving this way. But we can also notice exactly the opposite. And so we said here that this is the bullish. Well, we have here, for example, the bearish movement of the price. And so bullish on the left, bearish on the right side. Let's analyze and let's look a little bit closer into the bearish power of 3. We have said before that we start our analysis always from the left side. And when we started from the left side, going from left to right, we notice here right away the first point, point number 1. Then we have point number 2, point number 3, point number 4, and point number 5. And so what are we observing here? From the point number 1 is where the price is near the high of that time period, for example, of that day or of that week. Then the price trades higher, and so it forms actually the high of that time period. Then in point number 3, it really falls down big time. And in point number 4, the price creates the new low. Finally, point number 5, the price closes near the low. And so, guys, as we said, the bullish power of 3 and the bearish power of 3 are opposite. In the bullish power of 3, we want to enter in number 2, capitalize on that price movement that happens in number 3, and exit close all around point number 4. In the bearish power of 3, we again want to enter in number 2, so close to the high of the day, only for us to go lower, capitalize on the movement number 3, and exit as close as possible to number 4. So again, number 2 for both power of 3 is where we want to be trying to enter the price movements. Number 3 is what we want to capitalize on and hopefully the profits that we are going to be doing. And number 4 is where we want to get out of that specific movement. And now, guys, let's see an example. And you know me by now, you know this mastery by now, and you know that one concept that is very close to ICT and to ICT teachings on which everything is based is actually time. How does the power of 3 look like when we're talking about merging this concept with time? Well, let's take, for example, the bullish power of 3, and let's project this power of 3, these movements throughout time in a bullish pattern. We have seen the numbers, so we know that the bullish pattern is going to go with like 1 close to the low of the day, 2 forming the low of that, for example, specific day, 3 being the rally, 4 forming the high, and 5 closing close to the high of that day. Let's look at a concrete example from the charts. And let's take Euro USD, for example. Here we have the 14th of February 2024 from midnight until midnight. And we can observe here highlighted the price movements of that specific day. Can you observe the power of 3 here happening? Well, at the beginning of that day, at midnight, we're going to have the point number 1. Then we're going to see the price moving lower and forming the low of that day, telling us that, oh, you know, the price is going lower, but that's actually a counter move because what the price really wants to do is form the move number 3 by going higher and higher and being bullish. Then it forms the high of the day. In this case, you see two highs, the one on the left and the one on the right. And finally, the price is going to be closing lower than point number 4, but still high. And so it was a bullish day. The same would be true if we analyze the bearish power of 3 throughout time. And so looking at the bearish movement and at the bearish pattern. As we have seen before, in a bearish pattern, we have the price starting at or close to the high of that day, forming the high of that day, and then going much, much lower, forming a bearish movement, forming the low of the day, point number 4, and then closing close to point number 4. And so let's take a day as an example and let's analyze the price movements. Here, for example, we have a bearish pattern, a bearish power of 3 throughout time. This big candle is due because of news, but this can happen also without news. And in that case, maybe we're not going to have only one extremely bearish candle, we're maybe going to have more than one. But the example still stands. And so in this day, the 13th of February 2024, what we can observe is the price first and foremost, opening close to the high of that day. Point number 2, forming the high of that day. Point number 3, going lower and lower, in this case due to the news. and then forming the low of that day in point number 4. Finally, closing that day close to point number 4, and so close to the low of that day. Now, guys, we have here the bullish and the bearish power of 3, and we can really compare the movements. How do we know when we are actually at point number 4? Because we have seen point number 2 that is somehow close to the opening of that specific day, but how do we find point number 4? And so the right moment to actually exit our trade so that we can take our profits. And everyone wants to maximize their profits, so it's important that we focus on knowing when to exit that specific move. Well, what we're going to be looking at is time. On a daily power of 3, the point number 4 is likely to occur around 3:30 p.m. to 3:45 p.m. New York local time. On a weekly, and when we're thinking about a weekly power of 3, the point number 4 is likely to occur on Friday before or during lunchtime, the latest. So guys, you know that I'm a big fan of time, and power of 3 is still connected to time as every other ICT concept, because all of the ICT concepts are somehow based and connected with time. We can have powers 3 that are daily, that are weekly, even that are hourly. But higher the time frame and more useful it is for us. So I would highly advise you to consider and to try to read Power of Trees in terms of the weekly and the daily mainly. The funny thing is that powers of three are really everywhere, and it's such a beautiful concept that can really help us understand better the why of the price movements and make sense of something that sometimes can appear very complicated. I hope that you enjoyed these videos, and guys, remember, this is the way.